What happens when a Hollywood icon, known for discipline, loyalty, and quiet strength, suddenly decides he's had enough of being pushed, prodded, and cornered on live television? What happens when Mark Wahlberg, a man who rarely lets tension show, is finally pressed past the line by none other than Whoopi Goldberg on The View? Before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe to Stage View, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because what you're about to hear is one of the most unexpectedly explosive daytime TV moments in recent memory. The morning began like any ordinary episode of The View. Bright lights, a buzzing studio audience, cameras gliding across the polished floor, the hosts settling in behind their iconic semicircular table. But there was something different, something almost electric, humming beneath the surface. Maybe it was the nature of the topic. Maybe it was the guest. Maybe it was the weather. Whatever it was, the air felt strangely charged. Mark Wahlberg, actor, producer, businessman, walked onto the stage with the calm, steady confidence he was known for. The applause was warm, welcoming, but Mark's usually relaxed smile felt tighter today, like he was bracing for something. Maybe he already sensed what was coming. Beside him, Whoopi Goldberg watched with a narrowed gaze, her expression unreadable. She had interviewed countless celebrities, politicians, performers, activists, you name it, and she had seen every kind of reaction on her show. But Mark Wahlberg was different. He came with a reputation, respectful, steady, grounded, but unafraid to stand his ground when something didn't sit right with him. The moment he took his seat, he adjusted his jacket, leaned forward slightly, and flashed a polite smile. "Thanks for having me," he said, his voice calm, smooth. Whoopi nodded slowly. Too slowly. "We're glad you're here," she said. Her tone was neutral, but not friendly neutral. It had an edge, a sharpness. The audience clapped again, oblivious to the subtle tension beginning to thread itself between the two. Sonny Hostin offered the first question, something innocuous about Mark's upcoming film. He answered with practiced ease, expressing his excitement, sharing anecdotes about filming, joking about tough training sessions. The energy felt normal, light, even fun. But then, as if waiting for the perfect moment to pounce, Whoopi straightened in her chair. "So, Mark," she began, her tone shifting into something firmer, heavier, "you've said some things recently, things that people feel are a little out of touch." The air tightened. Mark blinked just once, but it said everything. "Here we go." Whoopi continued, her eyes fixed on him. "You've talked about discipline, about how people today are too sensitive, about how everyone needs to toughen up. A lot of viewers think comments like that dismiss real struggles. Do you still stand by those statements?" The studio fell silent. Even the audience, normally eager to applaud, laugh, or react, suddenly felt frozen. Mark inhaled, slow and controlled. "I think my comments were taken out of context," he said, keeping his voice even. "I wasn't calling anybody weak. I was talking about my own experience, about how discipline saved me, how structure changed my life." Whoopi didn't let up. "But when you say things like that, don't you think it sounds like you're telling people their struggles aren't valid?" Mark leaned back slightly, jaw tightening. This was not going to be a simple interview. "I'm saying people can overcome," he replied. "That's the point. I've lived it. I've seen what happens when you take responsibility, when you push yourself." Whoopi raised a brow. "That's a bold thing to say in front of millions of people dealing with very real issues." Sonny shifted uncomfortably. Joy Behar glanced between them, already sensing the conversation slipping into dangerous territory. Mark's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with conviction. "I'm not taking anything away from anyone. I'm speaking from experience. If we can't talk about that, then what are we even doing here?" Whoopi gave a short, tense laugh. "We're having a conversation, Mark." "That's what I'm doing," he shot back, his voice a little sharper now. "You're making it sound like I'm attacking people. I'm not." The audience murmured. Energy shifted, turning dense, uneasy. Whoopi leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Do you think maybe you should reconsider the way you phrase things? People listen to you. You're influential. Words matter." Mark's eyes flicked toward her, steady and unwavering. "Words do matter," he said. "That's why I'm choosing mine carefully. I'm not apologizing for believing in accountability. And I'm not sorry for saying that hard work changes lives." The room seemed to exhale, a low, startled "oh" rumbling through the audience. Whoopi's lips pressed into a thin line. "So you're doubling down." "I'm standing by what I believe," Mark replied firmly. "If that's a problem for you, then say that. But don't twist my words." This time, the audience reacted loudly, some cheering, some gasping, some half-laughing at the audacity of the moment. Mark Wahlberg confronting Whoopi Goldberg on her turf? No one saw that coming. Whoopi gave him a look. One of those deep, long stares where emotion hides behind stillness, unreadable, heavy. "Mark," she said quietly, "do you think you're being attacked?" "No," he said. "I think I'm being misunderstood on purpose." Gasps. Audible shock. Even Joy and Sarah exchanged wide-eyed glances. Whoopi's tone changed again. Lower. Heavier. "You're saying I'm deliberately misrepresenting you?" Mark didn't flinch. "I'm saying you're framing the conversation in a way that makes me look bad. And I don't appreciate it." The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. The audience erupted, not in applause, not in laughter, but in chaotic murmurs. Buzzing. Whispering. Shock flooding every corner of the studio. Sarah Haynes raised her hands slightly, trying to calm the room. Let's all take a breath," she said, but her voice was barely audible over the noise. Whoopi leaned back slowly, folding her arms. "Interesting," she said. The word hung in the air like smoke. Mark leaned forward. "I came here to talk about my work, my story, my message. Not to be painted as someone I'm not." Whoopi opened her mouth, but Mark kept going, his voice quiet but carrying strength. "You know what I've come from," he said. "You know what I've had to overcome. I'm here because I want people to know they can overcome their own struggles. That's not an attack. That's hope." The audience softened, a quiet wave of empathy spreading. Whoopi held his gaze. "And that's respectable," she said. "But intention doesn't always equal impact." "Maybe," Mark admitted. "But sometimes impact gets distorted when people assume the worst." The two locked eyes, neither looking away, neither backing down. It was one of the most intense, riveting moments daytime TV had seen in years. Not shouting, not insults, but raw conviction. Two powerful personalities refusing to yield. Joy raised a hand. "Let's maybe reset," she offered gently. But it was too late. The moment had already taken on a life of its own. Mark exhaled, shaking his head slightly as if trying to shed the tension. "Look," he said, "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to be honest. If that honesty bothers people, that's not something I can control." Whoopi stared at him. "It doesn't bother people," she said. "It challenges them." Mark met her gaze again. A beat. 2 beats. Then he said, quietly but unmistakably, "Good." The audience erupted again, cheers, gasps, murmurs, a storm of reactions swirling around them. The segment was far from over, and things were only about to escalate. The studio couldn't settle. Even during the brief commercial break, the air felt turbulent, charged with the kind of tension that refuses to fade. Producers whispered urgently behind the cameras, flipping through cue cards, debating whether to pivot, soften the conversation, or let it continue in all its raw intensity. Mark Wahlberg sat quietly, hands clasped, jaw set. He wasn't angry, not in the explosive, dramatic sense. But there was a controlled fire in his eyes, a flame that came from years of fighting for his own redemption, from rising out of a past he rarely talked about unless it mattered. Whoopi Goldberg remained still, her expression unreadable. She didn't avoid looking at him. In fact, she watched him with an almost analytical curiosity, as if trying to determine what made him stand so firmly in his conviction. The cameras came back on. The applause sign flashed. The audience, unsure whether they should cheer or brace themselves, offered a hesitant mix of claps and murmurs. Sarah Haynes took the lead this time, her voice soft, cautious. "So, Mark," she began, "I want to go back to what you were saying before the break. You mentioned your experiences changing your life, discipline, accountability. I think people would like to understand the context better." Mark nodded, grateful for the chance to clarify without being cornered. "Sure," he said. "When I talk about discipline, I'm talking about a personal transformation. I was headed down a dark path. I made mistakes. Real ones. I had to look in the mirror and ask myself who I wanted to be. And the only way out was responsibility. No excuses." Whoopi shifted in her seat slightly, watching him carefully. Mark continued, "I didn't say everyone should live like me. I'm saying everyone should believe they can get better." The audience nodded. Some clapped. But Joy Behar leaned forward with a thoughtful frown. "But Mark, with all due respect, a lot of people feel like the message of just work harder doesn't always apply. Some disadvantages are deeper, more systemic." Mark looked at her and softened his expression. He liked Joy. Her delivery was sharp sometimes, but her intentions were generally sincere. I know, he said, and I'm not ignoring that. But I'm also not going to sit here and pretend that personal effort doesn't matter. It does. It changed my life. And I've seen it change other people's lives too. Whoopi interjected gently, a shift from the earlier intensity. Nobody's saying effort doesn't matter. But when you're a role model, the way you present your message can come across as judgment. Mark looked directly at her. I get that, but I'm also allowed to speak honestly about my story. The audience reacted again, this time less explosively, more invested, leaning forward as if watching a movie with unpredictable twists. Sarah nodded. I think the audience understands the heart of what you're saying. But what about the reaction online? The criticism? How are you handling that? Mark's lips twitched into a half smile. I've been criticized since the day I started in this business. It doesn't scare me. What scares me is staying silent when I know I can inspire someone. Sunny leaned forward, hands clasped together. But do you think maybe part of the backlash is because of the tough love tone? Some people feel it sounds dismissive. There was again the accusation of tone. And this time, Mark didn't let it go gently. My tone, he said slowly, comes from experience. I've lived through things most people only hear about in documentaries. I've hit rock bottom. I've had people tell me I was done. Finished. A lost cause. And the only way out was someone telling me the truth. Not sugarcoating it. Whoopi's gaze sharpened slightly. Doesn't mean everyone responds to that. No, Mark agreed. But some people do. And they deserve to hear it. The room went still again. Something was building. Not anger, but a deeper clash of philosophies. A battle between compassion and accountability. Between gentle guidance and hard-earned truth. Two forces equally valid, equally important, and colliding on live television. Joy tried to redirect the energy. Let's bring in the audience, she said. We love taking questions. But the producers signaled that the segment had limited time. Sarah then took a breath and asked a question that would shift the conversation entirely. She looked at Mark and said, Do you feel like Hollywood misunderstands you? The audience murmured. It was a loaded question. And Mark knew it. He sat back, exhaled slowly, and nodded. Yes, he said plainly. A lot of people in Hollywood don't get me. They think I'm old-fashioned or too strict or too whatever. But I've never been here to please everyone. I'm here to be real. Whoopi, to her credit, didn't interrupt. She let him speak. Mark continued. I didn't grow up privileged. I didn't grow up with opportunities handed to me. I built my life. And every time I talk about that, some people feel threatened because it challenges the victim mindset that sells. Whoopi's brows shot up. Joy's eyes widened. Sunny froze. The audience gasped loudly. Whoa, Sarah whispered under her breath. Whoopi leaned forward instantly. Hold on, she said, raising a hand. Are you saying struggles aren't real? No, Mark said firmly. I'm saying we shouldn't glamorize helplessness. The room exploded. Chatter, gasps, whispers bouncing off the studio walls. Whoopi shook her head slowly. That's a dangerous statement, Mark. It's a real one, he shot back. Sounds like you're dismissing people's pain. I'm dismissing excuses, Mark said. People don't always choose their circumstances. They can choose how they respond, he countered. A beat of silence. Heavy. Charged. Whoopi's voice dropped lower, calmer. Not everyone has the same resources. Mark's voice dropped too, but his intensity remained. Resources aren't the point. Mindset is. The collision was undeniable now. Two giants. Two ideologies. Neither willing to bend. The audience was split, half nodding, half shaking their heads, all wide-eyed with fascination. Joy tried to intervene again. Okay, let's not. But Mark turned toward Whoopi fully now. Not aggressively, but with unmistakable conviction. You know what bothers me? He asked quietly. We keep telling people they can't. That they're victims. That life is happening to them. And that message is destroying people's hope. Whoopi held his gaze without blinking. And you think your message fixes that? Yes, Mark said. Because it's the truth. And the truth saved my life. The audience broke into applause, sudden, strong, echoing around the studio. Whoopi didn't react. She simply watched him, still and contemplative, as if trying to unravel whether his unwavering belief was admirable or infuriating. Sunny stepped in carefully. Let's talk about your movie, she said gently, trying to redirect before the conversation imploded further. I think viewers would. But Whoopi raised a hand slightly, not rudely, but with authority. No, she said. I want to understand something. The room froze. Mark turned toward her slowly. Do you think people are too sensitive today? Whoopi asked. Mark didn't hesitate. Yes. The audience roared, laughter, applause, disbelief, all at once. And you don't think that's dismissive? She pressed. I think it's honest, Mark replied. Whoopi leaned forward again. Then let me ask you this. Do you think that honesty ever crosses into arrogance? Mark's jaw tightened. No, he said. I think it crosses into courage. A collective woe swept through the room. Sarah put a hand over her mouth. Joy muttered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Sunny silently prayed for the segment to end before something irreversible was said. But it was too late. The intensity had reached its boiling point. Whoopi exhaled slowly, looking at Mark like she was evaluating his very core. So you think you're courageous, she said, for telling people they should toughen up. I think I'm courageous, Mark said, for telling the truth even when people want to twist it. And you think I'm twisting it? She asked. Mark didn't blink. Yes. The audience erupted again. Some clapped. Some shouted. Some covered their mouths. And Whoopi simply stared at him. Silent. Observing. Calculating. Sarah rushed in, hands spread like she was trying to calm two lions about to leap. Okay, let's breathe, everyone. We have to take a break. But Mark spoke again before she could finish. I respect you, Whoopi, he said. I do. But I'm not going to let anyone, not even you, put words in my mouth. The weight of that statement filled the room like smoke. Whoopi narrowed her eyes slightly, then said, Good. Because I'd never let you put words in mine. Sarah nearly jumped out of her chair. We'll be right back, she blurted, forcing a smile as the screen faded. The audience buzzed. Producers scrambled. Hosts exchanged looks of disbelief. But the story was far from finished. And when the cameras turned back on, the confrontation would reach its peak. The commercial break didn't calm anything. It didn't soften the edges, didn't dilute the tension, didn't loosen the knot that had formed in the center of the studio. If anything, the pressure had intensified. The audience whispered furiously, leaning over seats, speculating about what would happen next. The co-hosts huddled briefly in a controlled, chaotic semicircle as producers gestured emphatically behind the cameras, their faces stiff with a kind of frantic professionalism. And Mark Wahlberg? He sat perfectly still. Not rigid. Not angry. Just anchored. Like a man who had nothing left to hide, nothing left to lose, and nothing to apologize for. His hands were clasped in front of him, elbows resting lightly on his knees. He stared at the floor for a moment, gathering himself the way a boxer might between rounds, breathing evenly, tapping into a deep inner calm. Whoopi Goldberg shifted in her seat. There was a subtle change in her posture, shoulders lifted, chin slightly raised. The posture of someone preparing for another collision, but measured this time. Not reckless. Not heated. Intentional. The stage manager gave the countdown. 3, 2, 1. The cameras snapped back on. The lights brightened. The applause sign lit up again, but what the audience delivered was a conflicted, hesitant noise, uncertain whether to clap, gasp, or brace themselves. Sarah Haynes offered a tight smile. Welcome back, she said in a voice just slightly higher than normal. We were having a very passionate conversation before the break. Joy chuckled nervously. That's one word for it. Sunny Hostin tried to clear the air. We want to continue this conversation respectfully. But Whoopi leaned forward and cut in, voice steady and clear. I want to pick up where we left off. The entire studio inhaled sharply, as if a sudden gust of cold wind had swept through. Mark lifted his head, eyes meeting hers without flinching. This wasn't hostility. It wasn't aggression. It was something deeper. Two people who fundamentally believed in different philosophies, refusing to let the other rewrite their truth. Whoopi clasped her hands. Mark, she began, you said before the break that you feel your honesty is being twisted, that the way your words are received isn't your responsibility. She paused, letting the moment stretch. But don't you think public figures have an obligation to communicate with awareness? Mark didn't hesitate. I think public figures have an obligation to tell the truth, he said. Awareness is important, sure, but not at the cost of honesty. Joy interjected, cautious. But honesty without nuance is better than lies wrapped in comfort, Mark finished. The audience gasped again. He wasn't being rude. He wasn't raising his voice. But he was saying the things celebrities rarely dare to say on daytime TV. Whoopi nodded slowly. So you're choosing bluntness over sensitivity. I'm choosing authenticity over performance, Mark said. Sunny shifted. But isn't empathy part of authenticity? Mark turned toward her, his voice gentler. Empathy is understanding someone's struggle, he said. Coddling is pretending that the struggle makes them powerless. Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. So what does empowerment look like to you? Mark answered without needing a second to think. Empowerment is telling somebody they can change, that they're capable of more than their circumstances, that they're stronger than what life threw at them. Then he paused, glancing briefly toward Whoopi. And empowerment is also telling someone the truth, even if they don't like how it sounds. Whoopi lifted a brow. Ah, she said. So you think I don't like how it sounds? You challenged me, Mark said calmly. I respect that, but I'm challenging you back. The audience erupted with a mix of applause, murmurs, and audible, oh reactions. Joy laughed awkwardly. I swear, this is better than half the drama series on TV right now. But Whoopi didn't look away. Mark, she said, let me ask you something. Do you believe that people who criticize your message simply don't want to hear it? Or do you think there's any valid concern in their reaction? Mark's eyes softened, just slightly. Enough to show that beneath all the armor, he was still a man who cared. There's always valid concern, he said. People are allowed to feel however they feel. But feelings don't change facts. Which facts? Whoopi pressed. That with hard work and discipline, people can transform their lives, he answered. That's a fact. I'm living proof. Your proof, Whoopi countered, is not everyone's story. But it can be, Mark said, leaning forward. That's the point. If people want it to be. The words hit the studio with a weight that even the producers hadn't predicted. Sunny tapped her pen lightly against her palm, thinking deeply. You talk about transformation, she said. But does transformation require struggle? Pain? Failure? Yes, Mark said bluntly. All of it. Joy blinked. Not everyone wants that kind of message at 10 in the morning. Mark smiled faintly. Not everyone wants the truth at 10 in the morning. That line sent the audience into a full-blown reaction. Gasps, applause, laughter, disbelief. The studio was alive with intensity. But then the conversation shifted again. Not because of Mark, not because of Whoopi, but because Sarah brought up something that hit deeper than anyone expected. She said, Mark, what would you tell your younger self? The version of you who didn't have money, didn't have guidance, didn't have stability. The studio held its breath. Mark's expression changed. Softened. Deepened. A shadow passed across his eyes. Memory, regret, pain. I would tell him, Mark said quietly, that nobody is coming to save him. The room went silent. Even Whoopi froze, caught off guard. Then Mark added, I would tell him that the moment he decides to save himself, everything changes. Sarah swallowed hard. Sunny looked down at the table for a moment. Joy's smile faded into something more serious. Whoopi studied him, not with irritation this time, but with a complex mix of respect and contemplation. So that's your philosophy, she said softly. Self-rescue. Mark nodded. Yes, but not because the world doesn't care. It's because waiting for someone else to fix your life traps you. Whoopi inhaled deeply. But what about the people who are genuinely hurting? People who don't have the mental strength, or the resources, or the support system. Mark didn't dismiss the question. He met it head-on. Those people deserve compassion, he said. They deserve help. But they also deserve to be told they're capable. And nobody tells them that anymore. Everyone just says, it's okay. You're struggling. Life's unfair. He shook his head. That doesn't help them. That keeps them stuck. The audience erupted into applause again, a deep, resonant applause that felt more emotional than reactive. Whoopi's expression shifted again, thoughtful, almost reluctant admiration. But she wasn't done yet. So you think society coddles people, she said. Yes, Mark answered. You think people are losing resilience. Yes. You think your message is the antidote. Mark paused, looked at her with a seriousness that made the entire room lean forward. Not my message, he said. The truth. The truth that struggle doesn't define you unless you let it. That your past doesn't own you. That you're capable of more than you think. Whoopi held his gaze for a long moment, longer than any moment before. And then finally she said, I don't agree with everything you're saying, but I see where it comes from. That single sentence was a shockwave. Joy gasped. Sunny's eyebrows shot up. Sarah looked stunned. And the audience reacted with a confused, surprised ripple of applause. Mark nodded. That's all I'm asking for, he said. Not agreement. Understanding. But before the moment could settle, before the tension could dissolve into relief, Whoopi asked the one question that would send the entire studio into its most intense reaction yet. She leaned forward and said, "Mark, do you think I'm part of the problem?" The audience exploded, louder than at any point before. Even the camera operators flinched. Mark's jaw tightened. His eyes didn't move. He could have dodged the question. He could have softened. He could have joked. But he didn't. Instead, he breathed in deeply and said, "I think you're part of the conversation. And the conversation is divided." Whoopi blinked. The room waited. Mark continued, "But I don't think you're the problem. I think the problem is that we've stopped telling people they can be stronger." There was relief. There was disbelief. There was emotion. Whoopi exhaled slowly, not upset but reflective. "Okay," she said quietly. "Fair enough." Joy muttered, "Oh, thank God," under her breath, earning a laugh from the audience. But the moment wasn't over. Not even close. Because what happened next was the moment that would make headlines. Sarah noticed it first, a subtle tension in Mark's posture. A shift. A ripple of something unresolved. "Mark," she said gently, "is there something you've been holding back? Something you haven't said yet?" Mark looked at her. Then he looked at the audience. Then he looked at Whoopi. And in a voice firm, steady, unmistakably clear, he said, "Yes, there is." The room felt electrified. And what he said next would push the conversation to its most dramatic point and set the stage for the explosive aftermath still to come. The studio had never been this silent. Not on a live broadcast. Not with the cameras rolling. Not with millions watching. Mark Wahlberg's words, "Yes, there is," hung in the air like a crack of thunder with no lightning yet, no rain, just the tension of something about to happen. Something big. Something irreversible. Whoopi Goldberg shifted ever so slightly, not away from him but toward him, bracing herself. Sarah, Sunny, and Joy all froze, caught between dread and anticipation. The audience stared, wide-eyed, leaning forward in their seats like they were witnessing the climax of a movie they never saw coming. Mark rested his hands on the table, fingers pressed together. His voice, when he finally spoke, wasn't angry. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was real. "I think," Mark began slowly, "we've forgotten how to talk to each other." Whoopi blinked, taken aback by the direction. Mark continued, "I think we've reached a point where disagreement isn't allowed. Where if you don't think exactly like someone else, they label you, judge you, cancel you, twist your intentions." The audience murmured in agreement. Mark's eyes swept across the co-hosts, then back to Whoopi. "And that's why I stood my ground today. Not because I'm stubborn. Not because I want to fight. But because I'm tired of walking on eggshells just to avoid offending someone who doesn't want to hear the truth." Sunny shifted uncomfortably but listened. "People say they want honesty," Mark said, "but the moment you give it to them, they get angry. They call you insensitive. They say you're out of touch." Joy raised a brow. Whoopi said nothing. Mark leaned forward. "And I'm sorry, but that's not conversation. That's control." The studio reacted instantly. Gasps, nods, scattered applause. Whoopi lifted a hand. "So you feel censored?" "I feel pressured," Mark corrected. "Pressured to pretend. Pressured to sugarcoat. Pressured to say what sounds nice instead of what's real." His gaze deepened. "And I won't do that anymore." The audience erupted in applause, loud, sustained, emotional. It wasn't cheering for drama. It was cheering for conviction. Whoopi let the applause settle before speaking. "All right," she said calmly. "Let me respond to that." Mark nodded, giving her space. "I agree with you on one thing," she began. "People are afraid to disagree. People are afraid of backlash." The audience hummed, surprised. "But," she continued, "that doesn't mean people are trying to control you. Sometimes they're just trying to be understood. And when someone feels dismissed, they push back. Hard." Mark considered her words. Whoopi added, "You want honesty. I respect that. But honesty without compassion can create more division. And division is what we're trying to fix." Mark nodded slowly. "I hear you," he said. "And I hear you," Whoopi replied. For a moment, just a moment, the tension eased. Two strong voices. Two different philosophies. Meeting in the middle, even for a breath. But the conversation wasn't finished. Not yet. Sunny leaned in. "Mark," she said carefully, "is there something specific that set all this off today? Something that made you feel like you had to stand up for yourself?" Mark hesitated. Then he sighed. "Yeah," he admitted. "There is." The audience fell silent again. Mark looked at Whoopi, not hostile, but honest to the bone. When I came out here, he said, I felt judged before I even opened my mouth. Whoopi stiffened ever so slightly. You assumed the worst of my intentions, Mark continued. You took the toughest interpretation of my message instead of asking me what I meant. Whoopi's jaw tightened, but she stayed quiet. And I'm not angry about it, Mark said. I'm just tired. Tired of being told I'm insensitive just because I believe in strength. He leaned back. We can disagree. That's fine. But we have to stop assuming that disagreement equals disrespect. Whoopi exhaled deeply, long, slow, controlled. The kind of exhale that comes from realizing something uncomfortable, but true. She looked at Mark. Okay, she said quietly. Fair point. A ripple went through the audience. Sarah's face softened. Sunny nodded gently. Even Joy looked relieved. But Mark wasn't done. He said, and I want people watching this, people struggling, people hurting, to know something. The audience leaned in again. You're stronger than you think, Mark said. Stronger than your circumstances. Stronger than your mistakes. Stronger than the labels people put on you. His voice thickened, heavy with sincerity. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to remind people of something the world keeps trying to make them forget. Hope. A wave of applause rolled across the studio, deeper than before. Whoopi watched him carefully. No mockery, no irritation, just contemplation. Maybe even respect. Then she spoke. Mark, she said, I still think your delivery is sharp. He smirked. I know, but I also think, she added, your heart's in the right place. Mark nodded once. Thank you. Then Whoopi did something no one expected. She extended her hand. Not dramatically, not for show. Just quietly. Mark looked at it, then shook it firmly. The audience exploded. Cheers, applause, whistles, standing ovations from random corners of the studio. Sarah clapped with her hands over her heart. Joy slapped the table in excitement. Sunny smiled with relief. For a moment, it felt like the studio had collectively exhaled. But the aftermath was just beginning. The segment wrapped with Joy joking. This is the most intense episode we've had in months, maybe years. The audience laughed, applause still rolling. Sarah teased. We need a group meditation after this. Sunny sighed dramatically. Some chamomile tea would be great. Even Whoopi smiled lightly, though she was still processing. Mark grinned. I'm good with water. The hosts laughed, and the show moved into its closing remarks before cutting to commercial. But the real storm didn't hit until after the cameras shut off. Backstage was chaos. Producers scrambled, phones buzzing nonstop. Clips were already circulating online before Mark even left the building. The confrontation, the conviction, the handshake, it was everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Headlines popped up within minutes. Mark Wahlberg clashes with Whoopi on The View and stands his ground. The most intense live TV moment of the year. Fans split over Wahlberg's comments, bold truth or insensitive. Whoopi and Mark. Heated exchange ends in unexpected respect. Comments flooded in by the thousands. He said what needed to be said. Whoopi was out of line. Mark was too harsh. No, Whoopi wasn't listening. Finally, a real conversation on TV. The internet was a battlefield, but also a celebration. Clips were viral. Edits were everywhere. Think pieces appeared within hours. Some praised Mark for being honest, brave, and unapologetically grounded. Others criticized him for lacking nuance or compassion. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. It was the most riveting moment The View had produced in ages. By evening, Mark's team released a simple statement. Mark supports open conversation. Today was one. Whoopi addressed the moment on social media with equal calm. We don't have to agree to understand each other. That's the point. Fans praised both. Critics kept arguing. The story refused to die. And you, right now watching this breakdown, you're part of that conversation too. Because moments like this aren't just TV segments. They're reflections of where we are as a culture, how divided we can be, and how unity sometimes grows from the most unexpected clashes. Before this story fades into the scroll of forgotten headlines, what do you think? Was Mark right to stand his ground? Was Whoopi fair in her questions? Did the conversation go too far, or not far enough? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want more dramatic, cinematic breakdowns of shocking celebrity moments, subscribe to Stage View right now. Hit the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see this showdown. Because more explosive stories are on the way.